Thank you so much, Adam. That was fantastic. And I'm really glad that you're able to join me here at the Interval in San Francisco for some live questions. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm always happy to be at the Interval. It's nice to be back.
Excellent. Well, this is a fantastic talk, and I love how kind of first principle it is, and it makes you question everything you kind of know about, the way you perceive the world. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about the human tetrachromats. And, I think we've talked a little bit about this. And, are they the super tasters of color? Do they get more than I do? Maybe I'm one I don't even know. I don't know how to test for it. But are they? And then there's also the colorblind humans, and they kind of have other types of, high contrast superpowers. Where do these fit in? Why do we evolutionarily understand why we have these people?
It's great that you use the analogy of a super taster, because that really does try to get at the problem. The question that we're asking is about trying to attach metaphoric meaning to these words, right? So the equivalency that one might draw if a person had an extra photoreceptor, a fourth kind, making that person a tetrachromat, or putting them in some way, like birds, have those 4 photoreceptors, or the mantis shrimp with the 12. Would they see more colors, like see colors out at the edges, or are they distinguishing more finely among the colors that we already see? So where you and I would see the same blue, our hypothetical nominal tetrachromat would see 2 different ones. Would say, oh, obviously those are 2 different colors. And so that, those people do seem to exist. Our own ability, even as trichromats, humans, that we're like weird among the primates. Even the primates don't really do that. And the evolutionary just so story there that you would tell would be to say, well, if you're a predator hunting, especially during the day, like the big giant reptiles were, like the dinosaurs and stuff, then it's really good to have really high grade, high definition color vision. And you see that even today in their descendants in the birds, right? And like raptors having really good vision that way. It's finely grained and good colors. Whereas you're descended, as we are, from the little nocturnal furry things that were scurrying around between their legs at night, trying to stay out of their way and maybe find some bugs. You don't actually need color vision because you don't really have a lot of colors to see at night. It's good to have night vision. So you see that in some of our fellow mammals. But it's only a mutation in one of those receptors that kind of doubles up, makes a new receptor that has a slightly different peak sensitivity, that the spectra that it sees are slightly moved over along the sliding scale, what we call the visible spectrum, that then humans and primates that we're descended from recapitulate the trichromatic color vision. There are researchers who are working on using genetic techniques to give primates that don't have all 3 photoreceptors as we do a third one, to see if they then see colors the way human beings do. And there's some indication that they might. That work has been going on for a long time. Color blindness, the human beings with non-standard color vision, were actually one of the beginning touch points for how scientists figured out how color vision worked at all. The chemist John Dalton, who invented the idea of the atom, Dalton was himself colorblind, and he was from Manchester, which, when he was growing up, was becoming the center of textiles as part of the Industrial Revolution. And part of textile work was having a lot of different dyes and pigments to make these textiles different colors. So he started collecting different bits of thread and stuff and saying what color he saw when he looked at it, and finally wrote about that. And had donated his eyes to the local museum to see if they could look through it and see if colors look different if you looked through the back of Dalton's eyes.
Wow.
They're still at the museum. You can go and check them out. You can say, like, I'd like to see Dalton's eyes, please. You can't see a difference. But it was work like that. There was some theoretical idea that you could take what Newton had described with this range of colors, and even his basic color terms, his primaries are sort of arbitrary as well. He was trying to match to the alchemical and Platonic octave, and so he named all these colors certain things. But like, if I look at a rainbow or a spectrum, I don't actually see those as well as Newton said that he did. But people were trying to figure out, well, how does one color get to another? How do they mix? How do the colors of light mix into another color, forming metamers? How do pigments mix? And sometimes they make new colors, sometimes they just get darker. These were all sort of mysterious things scientifically. So Thomas Young figured out that because he was interested in oscillation wavelengths of sound, figured out that there was some overlap with what Newton had been talking about. in 1801, I think, gives this bravura series of lectures over the course of a few weeks, saying like, actually, all you really need to see all of this range of colors is you really just need 3 receptors. He didn't call them receptors, but you just need 3 elements in the eye that you can combine in different ways. And you'll be able to see, if you have more of one and less of the other 2, or more of 2 and less of one, that you'll be able to see this whole range of wavelengths that he had done frequency calculations for that really matched Newton's calculations pretty well. He died pretty early. He was a savant scientist, and actually went on and helped Champollion translate the Rosetta Stone, in fact. But it was James Clerk Maxwell then who comes in and gets really interested in the same work. All of these folks have been training in using things like spinning tops and mixing pieces of paper like origami folds so that they could mix amounts of colors and see how they mix together and see what color somebody would see and say like, oh, well, if you have 30% more blue, this is what color people perceive. Again, all working with people who were colorblind, who did have color vision. It was different than most human beings do, to try to figure out, well, what's the difference and does it help prove our point here? What Maxwell finally did, this is a great experiment. He had a device that could shine different colored light into people's eyes and tune it a little bit like the experiment that I was describing, that I tried when I said try to imagine what your favorite yellow is, what the best yellow is. He could do that with different colors and use it to create a triangular color space where he would put red, green, and blue at the vertices of a triangle, and then the way they mix together would be along the sides, and then the way all 3 colors mix together would be how you color the inside of the triangle. And he did this experiment where he showed people a specific color, people who had some form of color blindness. He didn't know there were a bunch of different forms of color blindness at the time. He would show people a certain color, and then he would show them other colors and ask them what they saw, what color they saw versus what color it really was. And it eventually saw that you could plot those, and they would make a line. You could draw a line through them to one corner of that triangle. He realized like, oh, that's the receptor that those people are missing, or that's not functioning in these people's eyes, that one receptor. And he realized not only did that show kind of how color blindness worked, but also that it proved that trichromatic theory, that most people, that almost all people had those 3 receptors that could do the work through this very complicated neural calculation. It turned out to be much more complicated than anybody expected. This complicated, with just those 3, that you could make all the other colors. And that's intuitive to us now, because people who are watching this on a screen are seeing a screen where all of the colors, the vast range, if you're looking at a UHD screen, vast gamut of colors, almost all the colors that the human eye can perceive, are really just being produced by 3 different colors of LEDs, and then sometimes a white one too.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And we're going to bring in one of the founders of Lung now, Kevin Kelly, shortly. After this question, you showed a lot of history of color wheels, and kind of that this science is littered by the bodies of people who tried to create the ultimate color wheel. But how far do color wheels go back? What is the oldest one that we know?
Well, so a lot of theorists, back as far as Plato, certainly tried to come up with an order, putting a color in order. The oldest one, there's a wonderful book called Color Ordered by a researcher named Rolf Cooney. I may be mispronouncing his name, I apologize. And the oldest one that he identified is actually a circle of vials of liquid that are different, that are either from clear through yellow to dark brown. And what they are different color, or urine. It was doctors using this color wheel to identify, like, well, how sick is this person? That's really dark brown.
Right.
Our friend is pretty sick. And the thing I like about that the most is that you had to make it work, you have to have these glass vials, around basically what we call a boiling flask now in the lab, like the same kind of thing that's hanging up here at the Interval with a lot of the people's personal bottles. And those are the same kind of vials that enabled Arab scientists in the Abbasid period to start to figure out how spectrum and rainbows worked. So before Newton, that they were able to use to watch how light reflected through those before they had prisms, to try to figure out that, that light maybe refracts differently depending on what wavelength. We don't know what wavelength is, but there's different kinds of light that refract differently. And maybe that's how rainbows work. It was that kind of work that led up to what Newton was finally able to do in the 1600s.
Oh, very cool. All right. Well, welcome on Kevin Kelly, who was the founding editor at Wired, as well as one of the founders of Long Now. And at Wired, where you work. Welcome, Kevin Kelly.
It's great to be here. Adam, I love your book and your talk. It's really great to have something that we take for granted kind of exploded and revealed to be as amazing as it is once we examine it. And you've done a great job in explaining that. There was a couple of questions from listeners. One, Jim Jenkins from YouTube says, is there a simple way to tell if a human is a tetrachromatic super, is there a test to tell whether you have this fourth kind of cone?
How do they test it? That's a really good question. I wonder if they're... See, the problem is there's so much individual variation already, so that if you went and got like the whole range of Munsell blues and put them down in front of you and me, there are probably some that I think I'm just trichromatic. That probably I wouldn't see a difference and you would too. So it's hard to do that kind of test without doing sort of the straight ahead genotyping. There must be a test. I feel dumb about this, not knowing this, but there must be a test that you should be able to go and get. Isn't one of the home genome tests actually called color? You would think maybe they would.
But there must be some people who have maybe a more refined ability to discern colors that we couldn't. An ordinary person might not notice the difference between.
For sure, and this is actually one of the places where the color book overlaps with the booze book, because one of the things that research into people who are master sommeliers, so people who are very good at identifying wines, where they're from and how they taste and all these fine grade variations. Research into what sommeliers are able to do often says that they don't actually have a better sense of taste or smell than what I might have as an untrained sort of just person who likes wine. But they have a lot more words to describe the things that they are smelling and tasting. And they can use those to apply to what they're doing. And then that gives them a greater range a greater descriptive range, which is great. It's one of the reasons why when you go wine tasting, it's probably a good idea to not get the tasting words first before you taste something, get the tasting notes after, because it's really easy to incept people with those tasting notes, right? You can say you're going to taste the blackberry in this, and suddenly you taste the blackberry. Sure. Okay, so that's true in sommelier. I think that's also true in brilliant artists or in people who are textile designers or people who are doing mosaic work, that they may have they'll have a greater sensitivity to their possible range and have more words to describe them. And that gives them more access to being able to see these are different colors that I can describe. So it is possible that I might be able to see I guess those two blues are different, but that's just blue. I don't have a way to say that they're different, or they're so close that I don't even notice that they're different until someone comes around and says actually that one's a little bit more gray. And then I go, oh, right, of course it is. I didn't have access to it. And that's why the linguistics and cognitive research into color is so interesting, because it can kind of at least begin to reveal and get at those kind of differences.
So you spent a long time working on this book. Has doing the research, did it change how you saw the world or how you saw color personally? Did it impact you and change your mind from even when you first started writing it?
By a lot. I actually had a little bit of dorm room existential crisis for a while, where after talking to enough researchers, especially after doing research on the dress, that whether people saw it as blue or white, and you talk to enough of those folks, and you get to the end of these interviews and you kind of go, yeah, but it was blue though, and they sort of go, look, it's charming that you think there's any such thing as an objective color, but there really isn't. It's just surfaces and the way they interact with the quantum nature of the universe. And after hearing that enough times, you start to walk around looking around like, oh man, none of it's real. It's all just a surface with photons bouncing off of it, which I finally that'll keep you up at night. I mean, I was starting to really sort of get a little nervous about that. And no, you got to just own the fact that our think meat makes a world for us and we live in it, and that's okay. It's not just I didn't degrade into horrible solipsism. My partner at home is a weaver. We have a lot of looms and a lot of fiber and a lot of textile in our house, and I have a vastly greater appreciation for that work, especially because, and there are a lot of ways that weaving and textiles prefigure a lot of the kind of math that computer scientists do now. But one of them is that when you overlap fibers, and I only know this because I would come home and say, "Did you know?" And she would look at me and go, "Yeah, that's what I'm doing with the thing. I know that." That you're not actually mixing the pigments, you're not mixing the colors. They're sitting next to each other, and when colors sit adjacent to each other, they have all kinds of weird effects in your eye and your brain. They assume some of the properties of the complement of the color, and and with weaving specifically, they begin to act very much like pixels. Because you make smaller and smaller dots as depending on the overlap, and you can make patterns with those pixels. They don't use that terminology, but a lot of the early design that computer scientists had to figure out to make pixels work on screens, like anti-aliasing that early Macs used to do to make text look curved when they didn't have the resolution to curve it. Those are things that the weavers discovered a long time previous to that they had to do with the colors they were working with. So now the dynamic in my house of like what sort of color work is happening on a loom at any given time versus what I know about it and what she knows about it it's changed our hobbies for the better.
Well, it actually makes a little loop back to the Jack Kerr loom and the beginning of programming, and there's the pixel. So thanks for that little closing the loop. Great book. Thanks for the great talk.
I appreciate it. It means a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. One of the reasons I'm trying to think, why, you showed some of the archaea that have in some way color perception. And then, humans clearly have color perception, but, as we, talked about with, the World War II bombers, some of those were better at actually doing their job if they saw less color. But, do humans have all this color perception for danger avoidance? Is it for hunting? Do we know where that, is it so you don't eat the red berry or the red apple, as it were?
Right. I mean, one of the ways that color scientists amuse each other after in the bar at a conference is to go through the different evolutionary stories. But what's it for, though? Why is it there? It has to convey an evolutionary advantage. It has to convey a reproductive advantage, or a sort of sexual selective advantage. And in fact, this was, the color of the morpho butterflies was the thing that Darwin and Wallace argued about, was specifically, they were talking about, well, why do these things have color? It doesn't convey an advantage. In fact, it may confer a disadvantage. There's some research on guppies in mountain streams in South America, and this is sort of famous animal coloration research, where the guppies will have different color. They're the same species of guppy, but as you move down the stream, when they're a shrimp that will eat the guppy, they have different colors that either are more appealing to a potential guppy mate, or less appealing, or like less visible to the shrimp that are trying to eat the guppy. And there's this balance. And so what you really want if you're the guppy is to have colors that show up in the wavelengths that the guppies see, but not in the ones that the shrimp sees, right? So some of the good theories are that we see colors because it's, for sex, like all kinds of other stuff that we do that doesn't seem to have any other purpose. Because it's, it's important. But yeah, there's a possibility that it's because we're trying to find fruit in the forest. The fructivore hypothesis. You want to see the red fruit against the green trees. It doesn't really make that much sense because there's a lot of green fruit, and like a lot of our primate ancestors eat the green figs. So how does that help? You really want to be able to see shape. There's a hypothesis that it's a way to be able to better perceive emotional state. There are certainly primates that when they're at the peak of their fertility, then parts of their body will change color. When we unconsciously convey emotional state by changing color of our skin. If we have a skin color that you can see that, not everybody does. The range of human skin color is actually not that wide. It sort of goes from pink to brown with a little bit of red shade in it. But within that, there's a lot of dark light variation. But still, you can imagine like being able to see if someone was blushing would confer some evolutionary advantage potentially. These sort of stories are really, they're hard to tell, and they're hard to listen to because there's no real way to go back and unpack the truth of them. As you say, it clearly has some value. It has an informational value. But people who see human beings who see a different range of colors have other abilities as well. This is part of the long-term, it's one of the arcs in the book, is the long-term war between form and color. Since at least the Greeks, a conversation about this mostly false dichotomy between whether form was more important, the shape of things, which you really see by light and dark. Really, that's what we really mean, unless you're feeling them, or the color of things. And that really came to a peak with sort of the art criticism of the late 19th century, where there were people who were arguing, that color was more feminine and therefore somehow less. It was like a nonsense, completely culturally colored with a lowercase c argument, right? But until really until the Renaissance, if you had a statue, it was probably painted. If it wasn't painted, then you didn't. That just showed you didn't have enough money to get a proper statue, essentially. And it wasn't until like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci both essentially said, actually, we don't want to see any color on this stuff. It's just the form. That's the purest thing. But that conversation is a truth and beauty argument. It's not a informational or reproductive or evolutionary value. It's you don't have beauty without truth or truth without beauty. The form and color argument are two sides of the same thing.
Right. And I mean, we're getting close to the end here. But one of the things that's interesting to me is you talked a little bit about the Pixar thing of how, they're actually, in a way, using I guess you would call it like a psychochromatic effect to create a new color, right? And but is the electrification has it been studied as electrification of societies and emissive technologies like televisions and computer screens and now cell phones? Is that changing at all the way we see color? Do we know? Is that affecting us?
There's a pretty good case to be made, and some people did study this. For example, in the case of the dress, I go back to this because I covered it because it was a big deal, because it really changed a lot of color science too. The fact that happened meant that there were sort of years of research that followed trying to figure out.
This is the internet meme of the dress.
Yes. And there's a case to be made there that one of the reasons that image created a rigidly bimodal color illusion, right? One where once you saw it one way, you didn't switch. Whereas with like illusions of form, is it a woman or a duck or a rabbit or a duck, or is the cube forward or back? Those kind of illusions, they're bimodal, but when humans look at them, we tend to switch back and forth, right? We go, oh, it's forward, oh, it's back. And one of the weird things about the dress meme was that once your brain decided which color, you stuck with it. You sort of couldn't see the other one. After you look at it for a while, you can. I've started to be able to. Anyway, that's another one of those things where I got totally messed up when I look at it now. But sorry, I looped a long way away here. But the point I was trying to make was that there's a case that one of the reasons that happened was not just the nature of that color, but that people were seeing it on emissive screens. Everybody saw it on their phones or on their on their screen at work. Nobody saw the reflective image, the picture. There wasn't one. It was a picture taken with someone's phone. So clearly that had something to do with it.
Right. Would it have happened with the actual dress at a party?
Right. And the answer to that's almost certainly no. And part of the reason why is that if you were seeing, well, actually I might reverse myself on that. But if you were seeing that dress in real life, then when the thing happened that probably happened with that image, which is the person walked through a shadow, they would then walk out of that shadow and your brain would correct. Your brain would do the calculation and go, oh, no, that wasn't that. It was this. It's this. I'm looking at it now and I can see it in different circumstances and I can subtract the illuminance from the object. And I can do all the work of color constancy that I need to do. But in fact, some of the research on the actual dress, there's a researcher in England who bought it thing and put it in a gallery room and then illuminated it with LED lights, red, green, blue LEDs, so that you can adjust how much of each of those lights you're shining on it, but it still looks like normal light. So if you and I walk in the room, it seems like it's being lit by white light, but in fact, it's actually sneakily not white light. It's some adjustment of colors with the LEDs. And they were able to make people see that dress any color they wanted.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, it works on art too, like even art that you recognize. You can make any art do the Cathedral at Rouen, Monet's Cathedral at Rouen. It can look like, any time of day. That's the sort of thing where you start to go like, oh, maybe there's not it becomes the province of the philosophers, whether that object has a color, that surface has a color, or whether that color is created in a dialogue with our eyes and our brains and our cultural experience.
Right. I've certainly heard, when people talk about, paintings that were created before electrical light, that, if you're looking at them in anything other than sunlight or candlelight, you kind of aren't seeing them the way the artist intended. And it's an interesting question. One of our other questions is, when humans colonize other planets orbiting other stars, how will the local sun's unique light spectrum affect their perception? So, it's kind of all tied in.
So one of my favorite things, yes, trying to figure out, in fact, there are researchers who study exoplanets who both use the color that reflects off of those planets to try to understand their atmospheres, because different atmospheres will show different colors as we look at those exoplanets, even the little tiny specks of exoplanet that we can see. But also, yes, trying to figure out, okay, well, these are planets that have an atmosphere with a different composition than ours. So that changes what kind of light gets through. They have a sun that's different than ours. So it's emitting a different spectrum than ours is. Let's say there are plants. What color are the leaves? What's that version of chlorophyll? What's that version of the pigments that are doing photosynthesis? Are they absorbing all of the light they can so they would look black to us? And in fact, if it was a human standing there versus whatever primate thing, whatever lemur-like thing that evolved on that world would have eyes that evolved under that sun in that atmosphere and would see those colors in a very different way. They would have a different range of visible spectrum in the same way that on Earth, a bee or a fish or a snake has a different visible spectrum than a human being does. And you have to take all that stuff into account. They take it into account on the cameras on the rovers that are on Mars right now. Perseverance has cameras on Mars that are designed to take into account both what the image that they see would look like to a human standing there, would look like if it was illuminated by Earth light, what it would look like if it's illuminated by Mars light, and this is sort of metaphoric because the researchers don't think about it this way, but they'll say this is what it would be, what it would look like to a Martian.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, it reminds me of that one day that we had kind of ominously last year in the Bay Area when the fires were so bad that the sun basically didn't come up and everything was orange. And the kind of hilarious part of that was that when people used their iPhones to take pictures, the iPhones color corrected all the orange away.
Right.
So the only way to take a picture of it was with like earlier, non-software corrected things.
Then if the iPhone couldn't take a picture of it, it obviously didn't happen.
Exactly. Just like all my meals. Yes. All right. Well, I want to wrap up. Thank you so much for this. But the last question I want to ask you, last time you were here, Amir, 7 years ago was with Proof, and now with this. And what is the next first principle-based project that you're going to teach us about?
Am I booking space for 2028?
Yeah. No,
I know it took me a long time to write, Xander.
That's not what I'm saying. This is long now. It was short. Yeah, I just wanted to. Are you working on a new project?
Yeah, I have some notions. Yeah, right. That's all I was trying to ask. Jesus, man. Yeah, I have some notions. That there was a Virginia Pulsar wrote a really good book called The Fabric of Civilization. That sort of was like, I was hoping that there might be a textile weaving thing there, and I think she wrote it. So maybe that's not going to happen now. I spent the last year covering COVID-19, and the thing that I've gotten really interested in there is sort of how to understand how science works and how science doesn't, and what science is supposed to do. Because so much of what has happened with this tragedy of this pandemic for the last year has, I think, come down to not being able to explain what we know, how we know it, how scientists know it, what scientists don't know, and then how to say that to people who don't have the same scientific background and knowledge. And the very basic philosophy of how trials work and how science works and how scientists come to know things has gotten, I've been really compelled by it. I've written a few things about that, and I think maybe there's something there too. I don't know. I've been staring at a screen every weekend for a while. I might just go look at some colors outside in the garden for a while.
Right. Please do. Well, thank you so much. And I can't wait to have a drink with you here at the interval after this Q&A is done. It's been a very long time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, and I'm glad to be back.
And I want to thank you, our audience with Long Now, and our members and our sponsors of this series, and looking forward to having you at our next talk. Thank you so much.